Can you see the second slide?
There we are. Great.
You got it. Right.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Top left is Birmingham Children's Hospital, an old Victorian building. Top right is the new wing, where it's got children's cancer services on the first and second floors and rare disease outpatients on the ground floor, where we see families with ostrom. And bottom left is the snow that we had last weekend. So can you see my third slide? Blood pressure and BMI.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So first of all, as doctors, we have a horrible habit of using acronyms like BP and BMI. And these things can mean lots of different things. So when I look up BP, it means petrol, British Petroleum. So it's not a good acronym for blood pressure. It also means the boiling point of water when you're boiling a pan. And it also means barometric pressure if you're actually measuring the outside pressure for weather forecasting. And of course, BMI, as people will know in the UK, stands for a healthcare company called BMI Healthcare. So I apologize to all families that we're still using these acronyms, which we shouldn't. So BP here stands for blood pressure. And on my next slide, what I'm describing really is the circulation system around the body, which, as you know, the heart acts as the pump. It pumps blood around the arteries to all parts of the body, and then that blood comes back to the veins, back to the heart again. Now, blood flow usually flows from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure. And that pressure is generated by the pump. And the pump is, of course, the heart, where the pressure is the highest. And by the time that heart has pumped the blood from the heart round to the edges of our bodies, like hands and feet, the pressure, of course, is very low. Now, if there's a lot of resistance in the system, then the heart has to pump extra hard to get the blood around the body. So it needs to generate more pressure. So that builds up the blood pressure. And that's what we can measure when we're measuring blood pressure, how hard the heart has to pump to get the blood around the body. So my next slide is just to try and explain what on earth 120/70 millimeters of Hg means. So doctors often express blood pressure with two numbers and a couple of bits over it. So the top number, 120, is the pressure that's generated by the heart when it beats. So that heartbeat pushes the pressure to push that blood along of 120. And it's called millimeters of mercury because that's how high that pressure would push up a column of mercury. And some older members may remember that 20 years ago, we used to measure blood pressure by a cuff and a box with a glass column full of mercury in it. And as you pump up the blood pressure, that column of mercury rises and it will record the amount of pressure that your heart is pushing around the blood when it gets pumped up. So mmHg stands for millimeters of mercury because that was how the pressures were defined in the first place. Now, the bottom number, 70, is the lowest pressure generated by the heart between beats. So that's measuring what's the pressure that's left from between one beat to the next beat, and it's called diastolic pressure. But the key thing is the top pressure is the highest pressure the heart generates. The bottom number is the pressure between the beats, and that's what we can use to try and record how hard the heart is having to work to pump the blood around. Now, the next slide is a bit of an experiment. I'm going to try and see if I can get you to hear what it sounds like when you're listening down a stethoscope to a blood pressure monitor measuring somebody's blood pressure. So I'm going to click on it and we'll see if this works. You might get an advert first. People with ADHD. Yeah, we get an advert first, so I apologize. I'll get rid of the advert. And here we go. Hear the bump? That's the high pressure. And that's the low pressure as the sound disappears again as well. Could anybody hear that?
Yes, Tim.
Excellent. I'll play it one more time. Okay. That's the systolic pressure. that's going down to the in between beat pressure, the diastolic pressure. So that's what it would sound like if you were listening to, if you were taking somebody's blood pressure. That's what it sounds like, to get the idea. So that's what we've got. Let's see if I can move on. So why is blood pressure, measuring it, important? Well, there's a couple of important bits. First of all, blood pressure goes up as you get older. So I'm old, so my blood pressure is higher than some of the other people, Catherine, say on the call here. So it gets older as you get, it goes up as you get older. Blood pressure is usually lower in children, but if it's high in children, that can sometimes mean there may be a problem with the kidneys. So that's why we measure it in children. Blood pressure can be higher in adults, and that can increase the risk for heart disease or strokes. So that's why we measure it. So when we measure somebody's blood pressure, we think, are they older? It's higher in men than women. It's higher in people of African origin than perhaps, say, European origin. It's higher in people who are overweight or obese, and it can be high with people with diabetes. So it's a part of the general health check that we do for everybody, just to see how hard the heart is having to work to pump. So we've been fortunate in getting some funding from the National Health Service to send out blood pressure monitors to our families around the country. And they're very small little electric devices nowadays that you can use and put batteries in, and it enables you to check your blood pressure at home, write it down, and then share it with the nurses or the doctors for your clinic. And hopefully a lot of UK families have been able to have access to this as well. And related to that, we've also been able to send out weighing scales. So these are weighing scales that should be talking weighing scales, again powered by a battery, that you can flick a switch on the back to make them audio, and they should be able to read your weight in kilograms or pounds, to help keep an eye on one of the big factors for blood pressure as part of it. So that really takes us to why are we interested in weight? Well, it's one of the measures we look at for measures of a rough measure of body fat, and the BMI, or the body mass index, is a very approximate measure of what body fat is. So it's really very simple. It's the weight in kilograms divided by your height in centimeters squared. So I've given an example of Phil, a gentleman who's 80 kilograms in weight and 178 centimeters tall. So if you divide his weight 80 by 1.78 meters times 1.78 meters, it gives him a body mass index of 25.8 kilograms per square meter. And these are helpful just to get some idea, because people have measured thousands and thousands of adults, healthy adults, and follow them up, and that they can predict that if the body mass index goes above certain levels, it can increase the risk of complications like blood pressure, heart disease, or other problems. So in children, we use these charts. So this is a girl's body mass index chart. And what you can see is along the horizontal axis at the bottom is the age, and it's from 1 to 20 years of age. And in the vertical axis on the left-hand side, it's the body mass index, or a rough measure of fat. And it's interesting.
Divide 1 root 1 decimal 6 4.
Is that me?
Alex, can you go on to mute, please?
Okay. So all I wanted to show is that in the middle black line is the average body mass index. And the important thing is that it gradually increases during childhood, and that everybody's body mass index is quite small at about the age of 4 or 5, and it gradually goes up over time. And by measuring lots and lots of children or adults, you can get some ideas of cutoffs of what is in a healthy range and what might be overweight. So it has been defined for adults. So if you can remember the figure of 18.5, if your body mass index is less than that, you're probably a little bit too light or a bit underweight. If you're between 18.5 and 25, that's probably a healthy body mass index to have. And if you're 25 to 30, probably a bit overweight. And if it's above 30, it's probably obese or more overweight. But it has to be said that for some people, like if you measure weightlifters or rugby players with a lot of muscle mass, their body mass index can also be above 30 as well. So it's only a rough measure of health for that. What we've tried to do, it's very frustrating for our Alstrom families to plot children's body mass index on a Charles chart for children who don't have Alstrom syndrome. So with the help of one of our students, Maria Charalambides, she's plotted the body mass index for children from South Asian backgrounds and from white European backgrounds on just a chart for Alstrom. And this is really nice because the middle orange line represents the average body mass index at different ages for children. And all those colored lines with the dots are joined up are individual children. And you can see how much it varies from child to child. So that's okay, but at least we can show for families where they're trying to keep an eye on the body mass index, we can relate it to the average for Alstrom children. And it's much more relevant and hopefully reassuring as well if you can see a body mass index is close to what the average Alstrom child would have. So there are some important things that you can do if the blood pressure measurement is high or if the body mass index level is above the overweight range. And some of these overlap as well. So there are some practical things. For blood pressure, a really practical thing is to try not to eat too much salt. So when I was growing up, it was very common for people to put a little pile of salt on the edges of their plates as part of their meals or scatter it on. Thankfully, people do that much less now. But if you can, try not to add salt to the cooking and try not to add it to your plates as well. Secondly, if people can try and eat as much fruit and vegetables regularly as they can, that's really good for producing good chemicals in the gut and around the bloodstream and clearing things like fats and cholesterol. So having a good diet of regular vegetables and fruit is really healthy to have. Thirdly, trying to avoid takeaway meals because they've got a lot of saturated fats or fats that can put up your cholesterol in them as well. So trying to eat from basic ingredients where possible, and maybe just having a takeaway meal once a week as a treat would help. And that, of course, helps reduce the calories for weight as well. Fourthly, don't smoke. Of course, everybody knows that, and I think far fewer people smoke today than perhaps we did 20 or 30 years ago. So because smoking can harden the arteries and that can put up blood pressure. And then after that, fifthly, reducing alcohol. Really good at this time of year, trying to actually have maybe just drinking once a week, but alcohol itself can put up blood pressure. And of course, alcohol's got calories in it, so it can put on weight as well. And then the final thing, trying to do something that's active every day. So physically active, either going for a walk or maybe trying to help with housework, or maybe trying to do some aerobics or some yoga or something just to be physically active indoors or outdoors. And all of those things will really help both blood pressure and obesity as well, bits that we want. Now there is, if you're doing the home measurements, or if you know what your weight is or blood pressure is and you're worried, there are three good places to go. The first one is try to speak to your local doctor or the local nurse who can interpret your reading and then can advise whether there's anything that you need to do about it. And secondly, there are some very good websites through the National Health Service that are free. Whatever country you live in the world, you can access these guidelines and these advice, and I think they've got audio software attached as well, so they'll read them out. And there's one of those websites, if you go NHS high blood pressure, there's a whole information page about what blood pressure is, or high blood pressure is, and what you can do about it. And similarly, if you go to NHS Conditions Obesity, there's a whole webpage with audio support that will tell you about weight and diet and exercise management to try and help that. So they're good, reliable sources that we could recommend to everybody in any country, I think. So that, I hope, just gives a bit of an overview, as we've said, about what blood pressure is, what body mass index is, and a big apologies in future. Having prepared this presentation, I shall stop saying BP and BMI in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that. It's always difficult, some of the work for parents that they do at home in terms of caring for their children. But during the pandemic, you know, lots more of us have been used to doing things to help our own health and be at home, and even with kind of telemedicine that we've been involved in the last 18 months. I'm going to just generally open it up to the floor to see if there's any questions for you, Tim. But my chat actually, oh yes, it's just syncing, as in SYNC rather than a boat. Don't have any particular questions coming through at the moment. I have a question for you, Tim, around, you've done some work around what the kind of the BMI is for children with Alström. Have you found that differs an awful lot for those children without Alström? Has it been hugely different?
Yes, I think the variation in body mass index is much greater in people who don't have Alström than in people who do have Alström. So lots of children with Alström follow a similar pattern. I guess that's what I'm saying. And then secondly, as Kerry and others will know, the children today who are transitioning are much less overweight than they were 20 years ago. So there's something's happened, perhaps with our better understanding and with what families do to look after children with Alström, where we see less of the severe obesity that we used to see 20 years ago. So that, I think that's positive, and it's not drugs, it's not medicines, it's general lifestyle things, I think, that have helped that. Yeah.
Okay, I wonder if you could just explain what you mean by transitioning.
Yeah, so I think the lady from Palestine referred to it as well. As children move from children's doctors to adult doctors, sometimes in that process we try and provide a handover for that. And what we try and do as children's doctors is get them to adulthood, 18 years of age, in as healthy a state as possible. And that process from about the age of 12 or 13 to the age of 18, getting people ready to transfer, that's what's called transition. And it's not just the medical things, it's about giving them all the life skills that they need to cope with adult life. That's what's called transition. And I think Anne Chesborough is on the call as well, and she could talk all about that as well.
Okay, I'm just aware we've got a global audience and some of our descriptions are not going to be the same. So we've got a couple of questions coming through, Tim. One of which is it possible for parents to have the BMI chart that you've got for children with Alström, the charts that you've shown?
Yes, absolutely. And I've been remiss on this. We're very keen to publish this so that it can be accessible to everybody. So
Okay.
we're going to put an article in Journal of Orphanet Disease, publish it that way so that it's
Okay, we'll lose
There's
it.
also a question from that was from Laura. There's
Yeah,
a question from I'll turn my camera off. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me okay?
yes, we can hear you.
Can you
Can you hear us, Tim?
Yes, thank you. So our
Okay,
next
so
question is our next question is, are there any medicines for children who are always hungry, even after they've had enough food? So the answer is not at the moment. There are people have tried things like amphetamine derivatives, and people tried steroids, but they've not been proved to work at the moment. There are new studies going now of drug companies trying them in children, and there's some new medicines coming. One of them is called setmelanotide, and another one is called liraglutide, which are now being, people are applying licenses to offer these for people, and we think these will make people feel less full. Okay, and we're hoping that they will become available in the next 18 months to 2 years. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I think Kerry's got a question for you.
Yeah, Tim, just thinking about some guidance for people that are doing some home monitoring. So when you mentioned blood pressure being different in children and adults, so the figure 120/70, is that different then for different age ranges, and is there different guidance that we should be giving? And then also around, you know, is there a certain time of day that people should do blood pressure and should do their weight? Is it better to do it at the same time of day? Things like that.
Thank you, Kerry. Yes, I try to avoid I try to avoid the question about the figure because it's different for different people. 120/70 is an average blood pressure for adults, but children's are lower than that. And different children might have different sort of targets for blood pressure. So it's best to measure it and discuss it with your local nurse or your local doctor, who can then advise if that level is okay. The best time to do blood pressure is first thing in the morning when a child wakes up, because then you're most relaxed, and it's likely to be the lowest. And if you do it after a meal or after you've been playing football, the blood pressure will be higher. So it's best, if you're going to check it, is to check it first thing in the morning. And then the final bit is when you do a blood pressure measurement, you could do it twice or perhaps 3 times, and then write them down, and then share those with your doctor or your nurse as well, because the blood pressure, sometimes it's higher the first one and then it's a bit lower the second one and the third one. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim. Another question that's just come through is a keto diet recommended for children with AS or a low carb diet? Okay,
so I'm not a dietitian, and I don't know whether we have any dietitians on the call. So if I say anything wrong, they could jump in and correct me. But I'll start, first of all, a keto diet is a diet that's high in fats, and the idea is it makes ketone bodies, a chemical in the bloodstream, as an alternative fuel to glucose. It's used for a particular form of epilepsy where it's been shown to work. There is no evidence that a keto diet works for anybody else and any other condition, and we don't have any evidence that it works or is safe in Alstrom, so we're not recommending that at the moment. A low carb diet means people who would try and reduce the quantities of carbohydrates or starchy foods in the diet, and that, again, we don't have evidence for Alstrom, but we have to be careful, because children need carbohydrates for energy, and they need their energy to play exercise and play football. And if they have a low carb diet, they'll have less energy for doing all that exercise we want them to do. And the other problem is with a low carb diet, if you don't give carbs, you have to fill up with something else, and that is probably protein or maybe fat, and they're high in calories. So the danger of a low carb diet is it may have got more calories in it. So my recommendation is don't try any of these diets without discussing with a local dietitian who can help you, who can advise.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Tim. We don't actually have any dietitians online at the moment, so that we do at Alstrom have additional information around kind of what a healthy diet looks like. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the Mediterranean diet, so again we can send that and give that to people too. Okay, so are there any other questions? You've got a cup of tea by the look of it, Tim. Lucky you. So that sounds like a good place to break for a tea break. Thank you very much, Tim. Your time, as always, is always appreciated.